Cassandra turned, finding herself face to face with one of the black men from the group. Up close, she could see he was perhaps in his mid-50s, with closely cropped salt and pepper hair and eyes that reflected both intelligence and patience. His suit was simple but exquisitely tailored, with a small pin on his label that she didn't recognize. "Yes, as a matter of fact, there is," Cassandra said, gathering her courage. This was her chance to make her complaint known clearly. "This VIP area is becoming too diverse." She emphasized the last word with a sneer. The entire lounge fell silent. Even the soft ambient music seemed to fade into nothingness. Aliens of various species watched the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, many not fully understanding human social dynamics, but sensing the tension nonetheless. The man studied her for a moment, his expression revealing nothing. Then, to her surprise, he smiled politely and extended his hand. "Ambassador Jamal Williams, Earth representative to the Galactic Council. And you are?" Cassandra's face drained of color as the implications hit her. Jamal Williams was one of the most powerful humans in the galaxy, responsible for negotiating treaties that affected billions of lives. His image regularly appeared in news broadcasts, though she had never seen him in person until now. She stared at his outstretched hand, suddenly aware of the hundreds of eyes, some compound, some singular, some clusters, all focused on her. The crushing weight of her mistake pressed down on her shoulders as time seemed to stretch into infinity. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The cool confidence that had carried her through boardroom battles and hostile takeovers evaporated like water on the surface of a sun. In that terrible silence, the only sound was the faint hum of the station's life support systems and the distant clink of glasses as a server, unaware of the drama unfolding, continued their rounds. The holographic image of news anchor Suri Chen floated above Cassandra's hotel bed, her expression professional, but with an unmistakable hint of judgment. Breaking news. Businesswoman Cassandra Webb faces massive backlash after racist outburst toward Earth's most respected diplomat at the Starlight Lounge on Galactic Gateway Station. Footage of the incident has gone viral across both human and alien networks. Cassandra stared at her comm screen in horror as the recording played. Someone had captured the entire exchange with Ambassador Williams. The video showed her sneering face in perfect clarity as she complained about too many of them, and the lounge becoming too diverse. It cut to Ambassador Williams extending his hand and introducing himself, followed by her shocked, pale face. Within hours, the clip had been viewed over 3 billion times across human colonies. Suri continued. Webb Interstellar Technologies stock has plummeted 47% since markets opened this morning, with major investors publicly withdrawing support. The screen split to show a graph of her company's value in free fall. 47%, nearly half the company's worth. Gone. 5 years of work destroyed in hours. Her personal comm buzzed continuously with incoming messages. Cassandra scrolled through them, each worse than the last. From her chief financial officer. Emergency board meeting called. Your presence not requested. From her executive assistant. I can no longer work for you. Resignation effective immediately. From her oldest friend, Eliza. I don't know who you've become, Cass. Please don't contact me again. Dozens more like these flooded in, along with thousands of public messages from strangers. Racist trash. Hope your company burns to the ground. You don't belong in this century. Some messages contained detailed threats that made her stomach turn. Several included her current location at the Gateway Grand Hotel. Cassandra's hands trembled as she closed the message screen. This couldn't be happening. Just yesterday, she had been celebrating a new contract worth billions. Now, her comm pinged with a notification from her banking app. She opened it to find her executive access to company accounts had been revoked. Her personal accounts remained, but they contained only a fraction of her former wealth. Most of her assets were tied to company stock that was now nearly worthless. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Ms. Webb, called the hotel manager. I'm afraid we have a situation. There's a crowd gathering in the lobby, and several news drones are attempting to access your floor. For safety reasons, we need to relocate you or arrange for your departure." "I'll leave," she said, her voice barely recognizable to her own ears. "Very well. We'll arrange discreet transport to the docking bays. Please be ready in 15 minutes." 15 minutes. Cassandra looked around the luxury suite that had been her home for the past week. She couldn't possibly pack everything. What did she even need now? She grabbed her smallest suitcase and filled it with essentials. A few changes of clothes, basic toiletries, and her emergency credit chip. Everything else, the designer outfits, the jewels, the expensive wines, would have to stay behind. As promised, a hotel security team escorted her through service corridors to avoid the growing crowd of protesters and reporters. Through a small window, she caught a glimpse of the main lobby where dozens of people held signs with her face crossed out. At the private dock, the hotel manager handed her a data pad. "These are the available departures in the next hour. I recommend something less prominent." His eyes flickered toward the luxury cruiser that had been her planned return transport. Cassandra nodded, scanning the list. Most ships were headed back to Earth or major hub colonies, places where she would be instantly recognized. Her eyes fell on an economy transport headed to the outer colonies. "This one," she said, pointing to the Horizon Seeker, a basic transport vessel. "Economy class. Are you certain, Ms. Webb?" "It's all I can afford now," she admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. The station's public announcement system echoed through the corridor. "All ships departing for outer colonies now boarding. Please proceed to Gate 37. Cassandra shouldered her bag, feeling its unfamiliar weight. She had never carried her own luggage before. The manager offered a tight, professional smile and a quick, safe travels before disappearing back into the station. The walk to Gate 37 felt endless. She kept her head down, grateful that most travelers were too busy with their own journeys to notice her. The economy section of the station was vastly different from the premium areas she usually frequented. More crowded, less polished, with advertisements replacing the art installations she was accustomed to. At the gate, a board attendant scanned her hastily purchased ticket without looking up. "Seat 47C, midship, shared cabin. Boarding now." Shared cabin. Cassandra had never shared accommodation in her adult life. Now she would be sleeping next to strangers for the 3-day journey to the colonies. As she walked down the boarding tunnel toward the ship, public screens along the walls flashed with news updates. Most showed her face, but a new alert caught her attention. ALERT. Vordax forces approaching human colonies. Ambassador Williams seeking alien alliance for defense. The screen showed footage of Ambassador Williams, the same man she had insulted, speaking urgently with representatives from various alien species. The Vordax, a notoriously aggressive species from the Outer Rim, had been threatening human expansion for years, but this appeared to be more than their usual posturing. "The Vordax fleet has disabled 2 outposts in the Centauri sector," reported a grim-faced military officer standing beside the ambassador. "We have reason to believe this is the beginning of a coordinated attack." Cassandra boarded the ship in a daze, finding her seat between a large man who smelled of synthetic tobacco and a woman with 3 small children crammed into the space around her. The cabin was cramped, the air recirculated and stale. As the transport's engines rumbled to life, Cassandra closed her eyes, trying to escape the mess she'd created. But behind her eyelids, all she could see was Ambassador Williams' face as he extended his hand to her, and all she could hear were the words that had destroyed her life. The ship lurched forward, carrying her away from everything she had built and toward an uncertain future among the stars. The Horizon Seeker was 3 days into its journey when it happened. Cassandra had been lying on her narrow bunk in the shared cabin, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the constant chatter of her cabin mates. Sleep had been nearly impossible since leaving the station. The cheap mattress hurt her back, the recycled air dried her skin, and the food, if it could be called that, tasted like cardboard. She was just drifting off when the entire ship shuddered violently. A second later, an explosion ripped through the cabin wall. The force threw Cassandra across the small room. Her body slammed against the opposite wall, knocking the breath from her lungs. Alarms blared throughout the ship, their high-pitched wailing piercing through the chaos. Cassandra's ears rang. Her vision blurred. Blood trickled down her forehead. Through the smoke and confusion, she saw that part of their cabin had been torn open. One of her cabin mates, the mother with 3 children, was pulling her screaming kids toward the door. The large man who had occupied the bunk above Cassandra's lay motionless on the floor. The ship's emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. The intercom crackled to life, the captain's voice tight with barely controlled panic. Vordak's attack. All passengers to emergency pods immediately. This is not a drill. Proceed to your nearest evacuation point in an orderly fashion. Another explosion rocked the ship. Cassandra grabbed the wall to steady herself. The mother and her children had already disappeared into the corridor. She stumbled toward the door, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. The hallway was chaos. Passengers pushed and shoved, some crying, others shouting. Crew members tried to direct the flow of people toward the escape pods, but fear had taken over. Cassandra was jostled from all sides as she fought her way forward. This way. A crew member shouted, pointing down a side corridor. Pods 30 through 45 this way. Cassandra followed the direction, recalling that her assigned emergency pod was number 38. The crowd thinned as people branched off to their designated pods. When she reached pod 38, a crew member checked her cabin assignment before ushering her inside. "Strap in tight," he instructed, already turning to the next passenger. "Auto launch in 60 seconds. The pod was designed for 6 people, but only 4 had made it. Cassandra and 3 strangers. They exchanged terrified glances as they secured their harnesses. Through the small viewport, Cassandra could see other pods already launching, small teardrop shapes shooting away from the dying ship. The countdown reached 0. Cassandra's stomach lurched as the pod detached from the Horizon Seeker and blasted away. The acceleration pressed her hard against her seat for several seconds before the pod's engines cut out, leaving them drifting in the silence of space. One of the other passengers, an elderly man, leaned toward the viewport. "Oh my God." Cassandra shifted to see what he was looking at. The Horizon Seeker, once a massive transport vessel, was now breaking apart. Explosions continued to ripple through its structure as smaller ships, Vordak's attack vessels with their distinctive wing-like appendages, circled it like predators finishing off wounded prey. "Why would they attack a civilian transport?" whispered a young woman across from Cassandra. No one had an answer. They watched in horrified silence as their ship became nothing more than floating debris. Then the Vordak's vessels turned and disappeared into the darkness of space, apparently satisfied with their destruction. Hours passed in tense silence. The emergency pod had minimal life support, enough oxygen and heat for about 3 days. Its distress beacon transmitted continuously, but in this remote sector, rescue was far from certain. Cassandra's thoughts turned dark. Perhaps this was karma. Perhaps this was what she deserved after what she had done. The elderly man had managed to access the pod's communication system and was scanning for any response to their distress call. Suddenly, he straightened. "I'm picking up something. A ship is responding." Hope flickered in Cassandra's chest. The young woman began to cry with relief. "They say they're about 20 minutes out," the man reported. "Earth Defense Force rescue vessel." The waiting seemed endless, but eventually, a shadow fell over their pod. Through the viewport, they could see a sleek rescue ship maneuvering alongside them. The magnetic docking system engaged with a clank that reverberated through the small pod. "Stand back from the hatch," came a voice over the comm system. "We're opening from our side." The 4 survivors moved away from the entry point. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the hatch swung open. Light spilled in from the rescue ship, momentarily blinding Cassandra. A figure appeared in the opening, backlit so that at first she could only see a silhouette. Then he reached out a hand toward her. "Ma'am, we need to hurry." As her eyes adjusted, Cassandra could see him clearly. The man wore the dark blue uniform of the Earth Defense Force, commander's insignia on his shoulder. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with deep brown skin and closely cropped hair. The name patch on his uniform read Johnson. Cassandra hesitated, something cold and uncomfortable settling in her stomach. She stared at his outstretched hand, a black hand extended toward her just as Ambassador Williams had been days earlier. The moment stretched between them. Commander Johnson's expression remained professional, but his eyes held steady on hers, waiting. Swallowing her discomfort, Cassandra reached out and took his hand. His grip was strong and sure as he helped her from the pod onto the rescue vessel. "Commander Marcus Johnson," he said once she was aboard. "We need to get the others quickly." The rescue ship's interior was cramped but efficient. More crew members rushed past to help the remaining survivors, while Johnson directed Cassandra to a seating area where other rescued passengers were being attended to by medical staff. More Vordax ships detected. "We need to move now," shouted another rescuer from the command console. Johnson immediately turned to his crew. "Finish the evacuation and prepare for immediate departure. Disengage as soon as the last survivor is aboard." The ship hummed with urgent activity. Cassandra sat quietly, watching as the final pod survivors were brought aboard and the hatch sealed behind them. The engines roared to life, pushing them away from the field of debris that had once been their transport. As the immediate danger passed, Commander Johnson made his way back through the ship, checking on survivors. When he reached Cassandra, he paused. Their eyes met, and his expression shifted subtly. "I recognize you," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "From the video." Shame washed over Cassandra in a hot wave. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The irony was not lost on her, that her life would be saved by someone she might have sneered at just days ago. "We'll be reaching the Mars outpost in about 6 hours," Johnson continued, his voice professional despite the recognition. "You'll be safe there." As he turned to move on, Cassandra found her voice. "Commander." He paused, looking back at her with an unreadable expression. But whatever Cassandra might have said died on her lips. There were no words adequate for this moment. She simply nodded, and Johnson continued on his rounds. Cassandra sat back, feeling the gentle vibration of the engines through the hull as they raced toward safety, away from the Vordax and the destruction they had left behind. But she couldn't escape the knowledge that she was now dependent on the very people she had dismissed, people who knew exactly who she was and what she had done. The rescue vessel shuddered as it pushed its engines to maximum capacity. 3 hours into their escape journey to the Mars outpost, warning lights suddenly flashed across the command console. Commander Johnson had just finished checking on all survivors when the proximity alarm blared. "Vordax vessels detected," called out Lieutenant Rivera from the sensor station. 3 ships on intercept course. Johnson immediately took command. "All personnel to battle stations. Get the survivors to the inner chamber." Crew members rushed to secure the rescued passengers. Cassandra found herself being ushered deeper into the ship along with others from the Horizon Seeker. Through a viewport, she caught a glimpse of 3 angular ships with glowing red engines gaining on them. "Why are they so determined to attack civilian transports?" asked an older woman beside her. "It's not about civilians," replied a crew member as he sealed the inner chamber door. "The Vordax don't distinguish between military and civilian targets. To them, all humans are valid targets in their expansion." The ship rocked violently as the first enemy shots found their mark. The lights flickered briefly before the backup systems engage. "Stay here," the crew member ordered. "This section has reinforced shielding." But as he turned to leave, another blast hit the ship directly. The impact threw everyone off balance. A section of the ceiling collapsed, blocking the exit and trapping them inside. "We're cut off from the bridge," the crew member said, trying his communicator. No response. Cassandra looked around at the terrified faces of her fellow survivors. Children whimpered in their parents' arms. The elderly man from her escape pod sat with his eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Another hit rocked the ship. This time, she could hear the distinctive hiss of air escaping somewhere nearby. "We have a breach," the crew member announced, his training keeping his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I need to locate and seal it before we lose too much atmosphere." As he moved toward the sound, the inner door suddenly burst open. Commander Johnson appeared, his uniform torn and dirty. "We need to move everyone to the escape shuttles," he ordered. "The main engines are failing, and we've lost contact with Earth Defense Headquarters." The survivors began to file out through the newly opened path. Cassandra followed, staying close to Johnson. "What about the Vordax ships?" she asked. "They're still on us. We're trying to reach the asteroid field ahead. Might give us some cover." They had just entered a connecting corridor when a blinding flash of light tore through the hull. The laser fire cut through metal as if it were paper. "Get down," Marcus shouted, spotting the beam's trajectory before anyone else. Without hesitation, he pushed Cassandra roughly to the side. The force of his shove sent her sprawling against the opposite wall as the laser beam sliced through the exact space where she had been standing a second before. But Marcus wasn't fast enough to save himself. The edge of the beam caught his shoulder, burning through his uniform and into flesh. He fell to the ground with a cry of pain, clutching his wounded shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, bright red against his dark skin. "Commander," Cassandra scrambled to his side, her own safety forgotten. "I need help," she screamed to the others ahead in the corridor. The commander's hit. She quickly removed her jacket, one of the few quality items she had brought from her old life, and pressed it against his wound to staunch the bleeding. The expensive fabric immediately soaked with blood. "Keep pressure on it," Marcus managed through gritted teeth. The medical bay, 2 corridors down. The ship lurched again as another hit landed. The lights flickered more severely this time, then dimmed to emergency levels. Lieutenant Rivera appeared, rushing to Johnson's side. "Sir, we need to get you to medical." "No time," Johnson replied, his voice strained but firm. "Get the survivors to the shuttles." "That's an order." Rivera hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." She turned to Cassandra. "Keep that pressure on. I'll send a medic as soon as possible." As Rivera rushed ahead to lead the other survivors, Johnson's communicator crackled to life. "Commander," came the pilot's voice, tight with stress. "Navigation system damaged in that last hit. We're flying blind, and the asteroid field is just ahead. Someone needs to manually reroute the guidance system, or we'll crash." Johnson tried to sit up but fell back with a groan of pain. "Tell me, what needs to be done?" he said into the communicator. "The auxiliary nav system needs to be reconfigured to take over primary functions. It's located in Engineering Section B, but everyone there was either evacuated or—" The pilot didn't finish the sentence. Cassandra listened carefully. Navigation systems, guidance protocols. These were things she knew intimately. I can do it," she said, surprising herself as much as Johnson. "I designed similar systems for commercial transports. Webb Interstellar's navigation arrays used the same basic architecture as military vessels." Johnson looked at her skeptically through his pain. "You sure about that?" "Yes." For the first time in days, Cassandra felt a sense of purpose, of confidence. This was her world. Technology, systems, solutions. "Tell me how to get to Engineering Section B." Johnson hesitated only briefly before giving her directions. 3 levels down, follow the blue line on the floor. "The access terminal will need my authorization." He pressed his palm against his identification badge, then handed it to her. "This will get you in." "What about you?" Cassandra asked. "I'll manage. Go. Everyone on this ship depends on it." Cassandra nodded, securing the badge. She kept pressure on his wound for a moment longer, until another crew member appeared to take over. Following Johnson's directions, she made her way through the damaged ship. Twice she had to detour around collapsed sections or sealed emergency bulkheads. The blue line on the floor led her to a heavy door marked Engineering B. She pressed Johnson's badge against the scanner. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a room filled with blinking consoles and holographic displays. Most were flashing red warning signals. The main navigation console was obvious, a large circular display showing their current position, the asteroid field ahead, and the 3 Vordax ships still in pursuit. Cassandra sat at the terminal and began to work, her fingers flying over the interface with practiced ease. This was similar to the systems she had designed, but with military-grade security protocols that she had to work around. As she rerouted pathways and reconfigured the backup systems to take over primary functions, her mind drifted to Johnson. He had saved her life without hesitation, even knowing who she was and what she had said. While working frantically, she opened a communication channel to where she had left him. "Commander, I've almost got it," she reported. "But I need to ask, why save me after what I did? You knew who I was the moment you saw me." There was a pause before his voice came through, weaker than before, but still steady. "Because that's what humans do," he whispered through pain. "We save each other, all of us. Not just the ones who look like us or think like us, all of us." His words hit her harder than any physical blow. Tears streamed down her face as she finished the repairs, the full weight of her prejudice and its senselessness crashing down on her. "Navigation systems back online," announced the pilot's voice over the main comm system. "We're adjusting course through the asteroid field now." "Good work, whoever did this." Cassandra wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smearing dirt and grime across her face. She had never cried in front of others, had always seen it as weakness. Now she didn't care who saw. The ship's engine tone changed as they entered the asteroid field, the pilot skillfully maneuvering between the massive space rocks using the restored navigation system, the system she had fixed. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, Cassandra felt something other than shame and fear. She felt useful, needed, part of something larger than herself. And somewhere deep inside, something was beginning to change. The Mars outpost buzzed with tension as refugees from dozens of attacked vessels huddled in temporary shelters. 3 days had passed since the rescue ship's narrow escape through the asteroid field. Commander Johnson was recovering in the medical bay, his shoulder wound healing but still serious. Cassandra sat alone in the outpost's common area, watching an emergency broadcast on the large screen. The face of Ambassador Jamal Williams filled the display, his expression grave as he addressed a chamber filled with representatives from various alien species. "The Vordax attacks have escalated beyond border skirmishes," the ambassador was saying. "In the past week alone, 17 civilian vessels have been destroyed. We have confirmation of over 3,000 human casualties, including children and elders." The camera panned to show the assembly. Many of the alien representatives appeared unmoved. A tall, gray-skinned Zenthian rose to speak. "While we sympathize with human losses, the Vordax conflict remains a human problem. Their quarrel is with your species, not ours." Other representatives nodded in agreement. Ambassador Williams looked frustrated but maintained his composure. "If human colonies fall, the Vordax will not stop there. Their expansion policy has always been total. Your worlds will be next." Cassandra watched, understanding suddenly how precarious humanity's position was. Without allies, Earth and its colonies stood little chance against the Vordax fleet. Captain Maya Hayes, the outpost commander, entered the common area and approached Cassandra. Hayes was a stern woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been handling the refugee crisis with remarkable efficiency. "Ms. Webb," the captain said formally, "Commander Johnson tells me you were instrumental in saving the rescue vessel." Cassandra nodded slightly. "I just did what needed to be done. He also tells me you have expertise in communication and navigation systems." Hayes studied her carefully. "Is that correct?" "Yes. My company designed most of the civilian systems in use today. Cassandra hesitated, then added, or at least, it was my company. Hayes nodded toward the screen where Ambassador Williams continued to plead with the Alien Council. We're losing the diplomatic battle. Without help, we're looking at full-scale war with minimal chances of victory. Something clicked in Cassandra's mind. A project her research team had been working on before everything fell apart, something they had discovered almost by accident. I can help, Cassandra told Captain Hayes, sitting up straighter. My company discovered Vordak's shield weaknesses. It was classified research, part of a defense contract. Hayes' eyes narrowed. Why should we trust you? Your reputation precedes you, Ms. Webb. Cassandra didn't flinch from the implied criticism. She had earned it. Because I was wrong. So wrong. And I want to fix it. Her voice grew stronger. 3 days ago, Commander Johnson saved my life without hesitation, knowing exactly who I was and what I'd said. I owe him, and everyone else I've dismissed, more than I can ever repay. Hayes considered her for a long moment before speaking. What exactly did your research find? The Vordak shields have a fluctuation pattern at specific frequencies. If targeted correctly, much smaller weapons can penetrate their defenses. We were developing specialized torpedoes based on this discovery. And this information is where? In my head, and in secure servers at Webb headquarters on Earth. Cassandra tapped her temple. But I remember enough to give your engineers a starting point. I can help Ambassador Williams make a case to the Alliance. 24 hours later, Cassandra found herself in a secure communication room, facing Ambassador Williams through a quantum link. His surprise at seeing her was evident, but quickly masked by professional courtesy. Ms. Webb, this is unexpected. Ambassador. Cassandra swallowed hard. I have information about Vordak's vulnerabilities that could change the outcome of this conflict, and I want to apologize for my behavior at the Starlight Lounge. There's no excuse for what I said. Williams studied her for a moment before nodding. Captain Hayes vouches for you, as does Commander Johnson. Let's focus on the information you have. For the next hour, Cassandra detailed everything she knew about the Vordak shield frequencies, drawing diagrams, and explaining the physics behind the vulnerability. Williams listened intently, occasionally asking precise questions that revealed his own deep technical knowledge. When she finished, he leaned back. This could indeed change everything. With this information, I believe I can convince at least the Illurians and Zenthians to join us. Their technology is perfectly suited to exploit this weakness. Use it well, Cassandra said simply. 2 weeks later, the news reached Mars Outpost. With Cassandra's information, Ambassador Williams had secured a powerful alliance. Combined fleet actions had already repelled Vordak's forces from 3 systems. Earth had been saved from certain defeat. Commander Johnson, now recovered enough to walk with a cane, found Cassandra in the Refugee Processing Center where she had volunteered to help. You did good, Webb, he said, watching her organize housing assignments for newly arrived refugees. Not enough to make up for a lifetime of thinking the way I did. She didn't look up from her work. It's a start. 6 months passed. The Vordak's War, as it came to be known, ended with a peace treaty favorable to Earth and its allies. The shield vulnerability had proven decisive, forcing the Vordaks to negotiate rather than face total defeat. Cassandra's life had transformed completely. Webb Interstellar Technologies had been sold to a consortium, with much of her personal proceeds going to a foundation for war refugees. She herself now worked full-time at a refugee center on Earth, managing resources and housing placements. The center was chaotic that day, with a new ship of displaced colonists arriving from the recently liberated Sierra system. Cassandra moved through the crowd with practiced ease, clipboard in hand, assigning beds and meal shifts. Ms. Abernathy, you and your children will be in Section C, pods 12 through 14, she told a tired-looking woman with 3 small children, eerily reminiscent of her former cabin mate on the ill-fated Horizon Seeker. Thank you, the woman said, genuine gratitude in her eyes. Cassandra smiled and turned to the next family, not noticing at first the sudden hush that fell over the center. It was only when people began to step aside, creating a path, that she looked up. Ambassador Jamal Williams stood in the entrance, flanked by 2 aides. His presence was commanding even without his formal diplomatic attire. Today he wore a simple dark suit with the small pin of the Earth Diplomatic Corps on his lapel. He walked directly toward Cassandra, who stood frozen in place. The entire center watched in silence. "Ms. Webb," he said with a nod. "Ambassador, we weren't expecting you. I came to see the center for myself." His eyes swept the room before returning to her, and to see if the change was real. Cassandra understood immediately what he meant. Was her transformation genuine, or merely a response to her fall from grace? "I'm still learning," she admitted, meeting his gaze directly. "Every day. But now I see how small our differences are when the stars are trying to kill us all." A hint of a smile touched William's lips. "That's a start." He extended his hand, the same gesture she had once recoiled from in disgust. This time, Cassandra took it without hesitation, her grip firm and sincere. "Would you show me around?" the ambassador asked. "I'd like to hear about your work here." As they walked through the center, Cassandra explained the systems she had developed to process refugees more efficiently, to match skills with needs, to reunite separated families. She introduced him to staff members from a dozen different backgrounds and colonies, people she now called friends. Near the children's area, Williams paused. "You know, the Illyrian representative told me something interesting after we signed the alliance treaty. He said humans were the most confusing species he'd ever encountered." "How so?" Cassandra asked. "He said we could be simultaneously the most divisive and the most unified species in the galaxy. That our capacity to turn on each other was matched only by our capacity to stand together when threatened." Williams watched as children of various backgrounds played together, oblivious to differences adults had been taught to see. He wondered which would ultimately define us. Cassandra followed his gaze to the children. "Maybe we get to choose." "Maybe we do," Williams agreed, one person at a time. They continued their tour as the center returned to its normal rhythm, the momentary hush of the ambassador's arrival giving way to the sounds of humanity carrying on. Different voices, different languages, different stories, but all part of the same fragile, resilient species finding its way among the stars.